Imagine boarding an Airbus A350 for a journey across the continents. And as passengers, we usually admire the size of the aircraft or the sound of its engines. But very few people stop to ask one simple question. How does a jet engine continuously produce enough power to lift hundreds of tons into the sky while operating for hours without stopping? The answer lies in one of the most important engineering concepts in aviation, the Brayton cycle. Today, I, Piri Machiluka of the Copperbelt University, will explain the Brayton cycle in a way that does not require an engineering background. By the end of this presentation, you will understand how air enters a jet engine, how fuel is converted into useful thrust, how and why modern engines are so efficient, and how engines continue improving this process to save fuel and reduce emissions. The engine, the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB. It powers the Airbus A350. It has a pressure ratio of 50 to 1, and it is amongst the most efficient engines ever built. As you can see in the diagram below, inside this engine are several major components that are always constantly working together. So first, air enters through the fan. It then passes into the compressor where its pressure is increased intensely. Next, fuel is injected inside the combustion chamber where chemical energy is released. The hot gases then expand through the turbine, producing the mechanical work. And finally, the remaining energy leaves through the exhaust nozzle as high-speed gases that generate the thrust, as you can see on the screen in the red arrows. Although this appears to be a seemingly complicated process, this is what simply explains the Brayton cycle. The big question: how does a jet engine convert fuel to thrust? The answer can only be summarized in four words: compression, combustion, expansion, and exhaust. These four processes occur simultaneously every day inside gas turbine engines. Air enters the engine, it is compressed, fuel is added and burnt, the hot gases expand, and finally, the gases leave the engine at very high speeds, producing thrust according to Newton's third law of motion. Finally, today we're going to discuss further in detail these four stages. Think about a bicycle pump. Compressed air, air gets hot, energy is added, and this is exactly how a jet engine does this continuously. Have you ever noticed that once you push the handle downward and compress the air inside the pump suddenly becomes warm after repeated use? That happens because compressing air increases its pressure and it also raises the temperature. A gas turbine engine performs exactly the same process but continuously and on a much larger scale. So instead of one piston compressing air occasionally, a compressor contains many rows of rotating blades constantly squeezing incoming air. So this compressed air becomes the perfect environment for burning fuel efficiently. Understanding this simple bicycle pump helps us understand the very first stage of the Brayton cycle: compression. The four stages of the Brayton cycle continued. From the diagram, you can see the representation on the compression, expansion, and finally exhaust. Under expansion, this is where the combustion also takes place. Stage 1: compression. Now that we understand the purpose of compressing air, let us examine the first stage of the Brayton cycle in greater detail. As air enters the engine, it first passes through the compressor. The compressor consists of many rows of rotating blades called rotors, followed by stationary blades known as stators. Together, these blades progressively squeeze the air, increasing its pressure before reaching the combustion chamber. From a thermodynamics point of view, this process is ideally known as the isentropic compression. This means that the compression occurs without any heat being transferred to or from the surroundings. Although real compressors experience some losses due to friction and turbulence, but the ideal Brayton cycle assumes a perfect efficient compression process, which is the isentropic compression. So the work required by a compressor can be expressed by the formula seen on the screen on point 5, which is compressor work is equal to H1, which is the inlet enthalpy, and H2 is the outlet enthalpy. In simple terms, the compressor consumes energy to increase the energy stored within the air. In simple terms, the compressor consumes energy to increase the energy stored within the air. Without this stage, the engine would never generate sufficient power to produce useful thrust. Hence, compression is very cardinal. Why compression matters? This has been discussed in the previous slide as to why the compression matters, because it just helps to burn the fuel. Stage 2, combustion. Once the air has been compressed, it enters the combustion chamber. Here, the fuel is injected through specially designed fuel nozzles and mixed with the compressed air. An igniter starts the combustion process during engine startup, but once combustion begins, the flame becomes self-sustaining. So temperature inside modern gas turbine combustors may exceed 1500 degrees Celsius. So the enormous amount of energy released during combustion is represented by formula in the screen. Stage 3, expansion through turbine. After combustion, the gases are now extremely hot and highly energetic. These gases naturally want to expand. As they flow through the turbine, they strike rows of turbine blades, causing them to rotate. So this process converts thermal energy into mechanical energy. So some of this energy is used to drive the compressor at the front of the engine in a common shaft. The final stage of the Brayton cycle is the exhaust process. After leaving the turbine, the gases still possess considerable pressure and temperature. Instead of allowing this remaining energy to go to waste, the gases are accelerated through the exhaust nozzle. As they leave the nozzle at extremely high velocity, they are expelled backwards. And according to Newton's third law of motion, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Therefore, the engine pushes the exhaust gases backwards and equal force pushes the aircraft forward. This fundamentally tends to form the process called known the Brayton cycle. For remaining handouts, please do reach out as I've exceeded my time, but thank you for watching and I hope you've been enlightened. So for more videos, you'll find videos on tip clearance and Euler's equations on compressors. Thank you so much.